I work in a hotel. That is usually where I stop when people ask me what I do. There isn't much point in explaining the graveyard shift to somebody who has never worked one. They imagine that the hotel goes to sleep when the guests go to bed, that the corridors become quiet and peaceful, and that I sit behind reception with a cup of coffee and a documentary until sunrise. It isn't like that. A hotel never sleeps. At night, when the lights are dimmed and the restaurant has been closed for hours, the building seems to change. During the day, it belongs to the guests. Families come and go. Children run through the corridors. People sit in the bar and complain about the weather. Businessmen stand in reception talking into their phones. The doors are constantly opening and closing. There is always noise. At night, the hotel becomes mine, or at least it feels that way. I work from 10:30 at night until 7 in the morning, which means that for most of my shift, I am the only member of staff in the building. There might be 100 souls sleeping upstairs, but they may as well be 100 miles away. I am alone with the humming fridges, the ventilation system, the occasional creak of the building settling, and the distant sounds of guests moving around in rooms I cannot see. I answer the phone. I check the occasional late arrivals in. I check people out if they are leaving early. I reset alarms. I check doors. I clean things. I take rubbish outside. I make sure the breakfast area is ready for the morning staff. I deal with guests who have forgotten their room keys, guests who want extra towels at 2 in the morning, guests who have decided that the slightest noise from the room next door constitutes a national emergency. Sometimes I spend 20 minutes resetting a door alarm that keeps going off for no reason, and sometimes I spend another 20 minutes wondering whether something I saw on a CCTV monitor was actually there. Sometimes I just sit behind my desk and listen to the hotel breathe. The week it happened had started with a heat wave. For several days, the temperature had been unbearable. Even at 10:30 at night, the air outside felt thick and warm, and the hotel seemed to hold the heat inside itself. The corridors smelled faintly of warm carpet and stale air conditioning. The windows in the breakfast room were covered in condensation. Even the lobby, which normally felt cold, seemed uncomfortable. The first night was, for the most part, ordinary. I remember thinking that as I started my shift. There was something reassuring about the routine. I signed into the computer, checked the arrivals and departures, looked over the handover notes, and made myself a coffee. The lobby was almost completely empty. The lights above the reception desk cast a pale glow across the polished floor, while the rest of the room seemed to disappear into shadow. Beyond the lobby was the restaurant and then the breakfast area. During the day, it was bright and ordinary. At night, it was horrible. It was small and tucked away from the main part of the hotel, with a handful of tables and chairs arranged beneath low lighting. I hated being in the breakfast area at night. The place always felt wrong after dark, and the light barely worked properly, flickering weakly as if it was about to give up entirely. There was a ketchup dispenser in the corner that always seemed to leak slightly, leaving sticky trails on the counter that no one ever properly cleaned up. At the far end was a little window looking outside. During the day, you could see the bin shed and the car park through it. At night, you could see almost nothing. The glass became nothing more than a black rectangle. I never liked looking through that window. There was something about it that made me feel as though I was looking into somewhere rather than looking outside. I had just finished checking the booking system when an elderly couple arrived. The man was short and portly, with a round face, thinning white hair, and a slightly breathless way of walking. His wife was taller and thinner, and she wore a bright red coat despite the heat. She had an unsettling, almost grandmotherly appearance, with caked-on makeup and small nubs for teeth, and a smile that seemed to stretch forever without ever reaching her eyes. There was something strangely intense about her face, as if she could stand perfectly still for 5 minutes without blinking. She smiled at me. "Checking in?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. I gave them their room keys and explained the usual things. What time breakfast is, when the bar closed, when checkout was. She listened carefully. "Do you work here every night?" she asked. "Most nights," I replied. "All by yourself?" I nodded and she looked around the lobby, almost with a sarcastic swagger. "That must be lonely," she said. I smiled. "It can be." She smiled back. "I imagine you get used to it." The old man said nothing, and they went upstairs. I thought nothing of them after that. Just your usual interaction. For a while, nothing happened. I did my usual jobs. I walked through the restaurant and checked that everything was switched off. I restocked the fridges in the kitchen, making sure the drinks and milk were topped up for the morning staff. I checked the toilets. I made sure the doors leading outside were locked, and I washed up the cups left in the kitchen sink, letting them pile briefly before scrubbing them down under the harsh fluorescent light. It was so hot in there that I opened the back fire escape door just to let some air through for a few minutes. I then checked the corridors. There is a particular feeling you get walking through a hotel after midnight. You know that people are sleeping behind every door. You know that if you knocked on any one of them, someone would eventually answer, but you don't. You walk past hundreds of doors without seeing the people behind them. It makes the building feel populated and deserted at the same time. A bittersweet sort of feeling. Around 2 in the morning, I took the rubbish outside. The bin shed is separate from the hotel, down the side of the car park. Much like the rest of the hotel, it is perfectly harmless during daylight but feels completely different at night. The security light above it only illuminates a small patch of concrete. Beyond that is darkness. And rats. Lots of rats. I fucking hate rats. I have never been frightened of many animals, but there is something about seeing a rat that makes your entire body react. The first one I saw was enormous. It disappeared beneath a bin before I had even properly registered it. I stood there holding a black rubbish bag, listening. Nothing. Then I heard scratching. I looked towards the bins and something moved. I dropped the bag and ran. I didn't care that I was an adult man running across a hotel car park because I wasn't about to find out what was making that noise. I knew in my head that it was only a rat, but the night gets to you. You have to try to find explanations for every little thing, just to stop yourself from going insane. Strange noises, just some rats, alarms going off. A guest went out a fire door for a cigarette. There is an explanation for everything. Whether you believe that explanation or not is up to you. I rushed back inside and locked the door behind me. The hotel seemed to be watching me. That's stupid, I know. Buildings don't watch people. But that night, when I returned to reception, I felt as though the hotel had noticed. At about 2 in the morning, the fire alarm went off. The sound was deafening. I ran through the building checking everything. But there was nothing. No smoke, no flames, nothing. I reset it, but 10 minutes later, it happened again. Then again. The strangest thing was that every time I walked towards the source of the alarm, it stopped. It was almost as though the hotel was setting it off simply to make me move. Eventually, I returned to reception and sat down. The lobby was silent. At around 3, I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't just sit in your body but starts to blur your thinking, making every small task feel slightly delayed, like your brain is having to catch up with your movements. I had long since finished my coffee and was just sitting behind reception, staring at the monitor without really processing what was on it. The hotel had settled into that deep, artificial silence it only ever reached in the last hours before dawn. No doors opening, no phones ringing, just the low, mechanical hum of ventilation and the occasional distant creak of pipes cooling down. That's when the old man appeared. He came out of the lift, sprinting. The doors slid open with their usual soft chime, and he burst out like something had physically pushed him from behind. For a second, I didn't even register who it was. I just saw movement, fast and wrong for that time of night, cutting straight across the lobby lighting. Then I recognized the shape. Short, portly, unmistakably the same elderly man from earlier. At first, I thought he was drunk, but he wasn't stumbling. He was panicked, running full speed down the corridor like something was chasing him. There was no hesitation in his movement, no uncertainty. It was pure flight. His feet slapped against the carpet in a frantic rhythm, and his arms were pumping awkwardly at his sides, as though he had forgotten how to run properly but was doing it anyway out of necessity. He entered the lobby, and that's when I saw he was wearing nothing but a pair of white boxer shorts. I looked away almost immediately. They were the sort of boxer shorts that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. They showed off everything. I don't mean that figuratively. I mean everything. I have seen things at work that I would rather not see, but there are certain sights that your brain simply refuses to process properly. Seeing an old man sprinting through a hotel lobby at 3 in the morning in underwear that appeared to have been selected specifically for maximum visibility was one of them. It was the kind of image that didn't feel real even as you were looking at it, like your mind was trying to reject it on principle. He approached the desk looking furious rather than relieved, like he had been pacing the corridor for an hour instead of a few seconds. His face was flushed, his breathing sharp and uneven, and he didn't even look at me properly when he spoke. I froze. The hotel doesn't exactly have a protocol for when you're approached by a fat old man in just his underwear late at night. "I've been locked out," he said, voice tight with frustration. I blinked. "Sorry?" "My wife locked me out," he repeated, louder this time, as if volume might make it more reasonable. "She shut the door on me. I went to get ice, just ice, and she locked the door." He stepped forward and grabbed the edge of the reception desk, knuckles whitening slightly as he leaned in. "Where's my room?" "You're already checked in," I said carefully. "I can take you back up." He exhaled sharply through his nose, like the answer annoyed him more than it helped. "She always does this when she's angry," he muttered. "Always. Like I'm meant to just stand in the corridor until she decides I can come back in." I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just nodded and came around the desk. "All right, I'll take you up." We went into the lift together. He didn't stop talking. "She thinks it's funny," he said, staring at the doors as they closed. "Locks me out, then pretends she's asleep when I knock. Like I'm the problem." The lift hummed as it rose. "I only went for ice," he added again, quieter now, as if repeating it might make it sound more justified. "That's all." By the time we reached his floor, he was still shaking his head. When the doors opened, I led him down the corridor. He stopped outside the room and pointed at the door like it had personally offended him. "She's in there," he said. I knocked, no answer. He knocked harder, still nothing. Eventually I used the master key and the door opened. The room was dark, except for the faint orange glow coming through the curtains from the car park outside. For a moment I couldn't see anything, and the old man stood behind me, breathing heavily, still clutching his boxer shorts in one hand as though he had only just remembered what he was wearing. Then I saw her. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. She wasn't looking at either of us. She was staring down at her hands, which were resting loosely in her lap. Her red coat was still on despite the heat, and her face was completely expressionless. She looked lost in thought, almost as though she had forgotten where she was. The old man stopped beside me. "There she is," he said frustratedly. She slowly looked up. Her eyes moved from her husband to me, and then she smiled. "Oh," she said it quietly, almost pleasantly. "It's you." I didn't know what to say. She tilted her head. "Reception?" "Yes." "We met downstairs." "Yes, we did." She looked at me for a few seconds. "You're the one who works nights." "That's right." She nodded to herself. She then said something, almost under her breath, like she was trying out the shape of it. "Part-timer." I laughed awkwardly and she smiled. There was something about her that made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't have said why. She wasn't threatening me. She wasn't behaving aggressively. She was just strange. Her eyes lingered on me for too long, and whenever she smiled, it felt as though she was reacting to something I couldn't see. "You must be very lonely," she said. I looked at the old man. He was standing beside me, looking irritated. "I manage." She nodded. "That's good." There was a long silence, then she looked at her husband. "You locked yourself out again?" "I went for ice." She smiled. "He's always losing things," she said as she looked back at me. "I can see that." She laughed. It was a surprisingly normal laugh. For a moment, the room felt normal. Just two elderly people having an argument in a hotel room at 3 in the morning. I handed the old man his key. "There you go." He took it. "Thank you." I turned towards the door. "Have a good rest of your night, guys." "Good night," she said. I stopped for half a second, but didn't look back. I closed the door behind me. The corridor felt colder than the room. I walked back towards the lift, listening to the soft hum of the building around me. The carpet muffled my footsteps, and somewhere further down the corridor a pipe made a faint knocking sound. I pressed the button and stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the corridor. Nothing, just empty carpet and dim lights. Went back downstairs and the hotel was quiet again. I returned to reception and sat behind the desk, and for a while, I did nothing. I simply stared at the computer screen, dreading whatever my next task would be. I checked the time. 3:17. Then I heard something, a scratching sound. It came from somewhere near the lobby. I looked up, and that's when a gray streak shot across the floor. A cat. It came out from behind one of the sofas and sprinted across the lobby. I was just glad it wasn't a rat. "Oi!" I shouted. The cat stopped and looked at me. I took one step towards it, but it bolted away before I could grab it. "Come on!" The cat disappeared through the doorway and into the corridor. I ran after it, but lost sight of it almost immediately. I checked the toilets and the restaurant, but there was nothing. The cat had vanished. I stood behind reception, breathing heavily. I still had over 3 hours left. I sat down and the hotel seemed to settle around me. For some reason, I thought about the woman upstairs. I couldn't explain why. There hadn't been anything particularly frightening about her. She hadn't threatened me, she hadn't followed me. She had just looked at me strangely, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that room had been wrong. I checked the CCTV, but there was nothing unusual. I watched the screens for a few minutes, then I switched them off. The rest of the shift passed without incident. No cat sightings, no old men in their underwear, just me and the hotel. At around 4:30, I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow ones, unhurried. I looked up from behind reception. They stopped at the bottom and then she appeared. The old lady. She was holding the railing lightly, as if she didn't fully need it but preferred it there anyway. The same red coat, the same calm expression. She looked around the lobby like she was checking it was still there. Then she saw me. "Oh," she said. "I thought you might still be here." I stood up a little straighter. "Everything all right?" She nodded. "Yes, I just couldn't sleep." She walked slowly towards reception, stopping just short of the desk. "I heard a commotion earlier." I hesitated. "A cat got in." "Ah." She smiled faintly. "Did you catch it?" "No, it got away." "That's a shame." She said it like it genuinely mattered. There was a pause. She looked past me, towards the darkened restaurant corridor. It's easy for things to slip out of sight in places like this. I didn't know what she meant, so I just nodded. "Yeah, old building." She turned her attention back to me. "You were looking for it quite seriously." "It's part of the job, sort of." She seemed amused by that. "Even at this hour?" "Especially at this hour." She nodded slowly, as if that made sense in a way I couldn't see. Then she leaned slightly closer to the desk. "You know," she said, "I think I saw it earlier." I frowned. "Where?" "Near the lift. It was just sitting very still, like it was waiting." I glanced instinctively towards the lift doors. Probably just hiding. Perhaps. She didn't sound convinced either way. Another pause stretched between us, and then she straightened up. "I should go back up." She hesitated, then added almost casually, "If it comes back, don't chase it too far. Some things in this building don't like being followed." I gave a short laugh, unsure if she was joking. She smiled again. Not quite warmly, not quite anything I could place. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She turned and walked back towards the stairs. I watched her go until she disappeared from sight. Then I sat back down. The hotel felt quieter than before. I checked the clock again. I still had hours left. Hours to kill. I was about to look away when I heard it. Footsteps again, but not from the stairs. They were coming from the corridor behind reception. I turned, and she was there again, standing just inside the edge of the light. I hadn't heard her come back down. She wasn't holding the railing this time. She wasn't smiling either. For a moment, she just looked at me, as if confirming something. Then she spoke softly. "I forgot to mention." I swallowed. "Yes?" She stepped a little closer, not enough to be aggressive, but just enough that I became aware of how small the space behind reception actually was. "I like this part of the night," she said. "Why's that?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because it becomes harder to explain odd things away." I didn't answer. She looked at my hands on the desk, then at my face. Her gaze lingered a second too long. "You're very good at staying awake," she said. She leaned in slightly, as if inspecting me. "You should be careful," she said. "About what?" She looked at me again. "The people you meet." I felt a small, irrational chill and forced a laugh. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she straightened up, as if the conversation had already ended in her mind. "Well," she said, "I'll let you get on." She turned and walked away. No sound of footsteps this time, almost as if she was shuffling along the floor. The only sound was the faint rustle of her coat disappearing into the corridor. The hours ticked by and she didn't come down again. At 7 in the morning, my shift finally ended. I handed over to the morning staff, gave them the usual rundown of anything that needed mentioning, and clocked out. The sun was already up by then, turning the sky a pale, washed-out blue. After spending the entire night under artificial lighting, it felt strangely bright outside. I walked home. It was about half an hour on foot, the same route every time, past the closed shops, the bus stop with the broken timetable display, the row of houses where the curtains were always still drawn at that hour. The heat wave hadn't broken. Even that early in the morning, the air was warm and heavy, and the pavement seemed to radiate it back up at me with every step. I remember thinking that I should have been exhausted. I wasn't. Not properly, anyway. My body felt tired, but my mind wouldn't shut up. I kept thinking about the old woman. I couldn't explain why. Nothing had actually happened. She had just been odd. I kept replaying our conversations in my head. "You must be very lonely. Some things in this building don't like being followed. You should be careful about the people you meet." And then there was the way she had appeared behind reception without me hearing her come downstairs. I told myself I was overthinking it. People are strange, especially people who stay in hotels. After working there for a year now, I've come to realize that. I got home, changed, and went to bed. I stared at the ceiling. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I turned onto my side, closed my eyes, opened them again. Every time I started drifting off, I found myself thinking about that woman sitting on the edge of the bed, staring down at her hands. Eventually, I got up and made myself some food. I watched TV, checked my phone, even went for a walk. Nothing helped. By the time it was getting dark, I had barely slept at all, and I had another shift that night. I considered calling in sick. I didn't. Partly because I needed the money, and partly because I knew how ridiculous it would sound. "Sorry, I can't come in tonight. An old woman made me uncomfortable. My manager would have laughed me out of the building." So at 10:30, I went back in. The hotel looked exactly as it had the night before. That was probably the worst part. Same lights, same reception desk, same polished floor, same darkened restaurant beyond the lobby. I signed in and started my shift. I hadn't been behind the desk for more than a few minutes when I heard a voice. "Part-timer." I looked up. She was standing near the entrance to the restaurant, the old woman from yesterday, same red coat, same strange smile. "Evening," I said. She smiled. "I knew you'd come back." "Well, I do work here." "Yes," she tilted her head. "Part-timer, where were you today?" I laughed awkwardly. "I work nights." She stared at me for a few seconds longer, then walked away. I watched her disappear towards the lifts, already thinking I wanted the night to be over. Still, I got on with my work. There was something comforting about routine. I checked the arrivals, answered the phone, restocked the kitchen, checked the doors, walked the corridors. Nothing happened. Then, sometime after midnight, she came downstairs again. I was behind reception when I saw her approaching. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over and stood on the other side of the desk. "Hello again, part-timer." "Hi," she smiled. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep much." "Why?" I shrugged. "Just couldn't." "Were you thinking about me?" I looked at her. She was smiling. I gave a nervous laugh. "No." She laughed quietly. "I was only asking." There was a pause. Then she said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I wasn't expecting it. "I'm sorry, what?" "A girlfriend. I don't really like discussing my personal life with guests." She nodded thoughtfully and then paused for a bit before saying, "Do you like girls?" I stared at her. "Yes." She smiled. "Do you like boys?" I didn't know what to say. "I don't really see how that's any of your business." She laughed. "Of course it isn't. I was only curious." "Right." She leaned against the desk. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Parents nearby?" "Not really." "Any brothers or sisters?" I hesitated. "One sister." "Older?" "Yes." "Is she married?" I looked at her. "Why are you asking me all this?" She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me with that same strange expression she'd worn upstairs, like she was trying to remember something. Then she smiled. "I like knowing things." I didn't like the way she said it. There are stories you hear when you work in hotels. Nothing official, just things passed between staff in the car park or whispered during morning handover. Guests who get too attached to staff. People who keep extending their stays because they've become obsessed with someone at reception. Guests who leave gifts. People who ask what time certain employees finish or wait around in reception for staff to start their shift. One cleaner had apparently been followed home by a guest years ago. Another receptionist had a man who kept booking rooms specifically because she was working. Most of the stories were probably exaggerated, but they were still enough to make you uncomfortable when someone started asking personal questions at 1 in the morning. The old woman seemed to notice my discomfort. She straightened herself. "I've upset you?" I sighed. "I'm just tired." She smiled. "Of course." She stepped away from the desk. "I'll leave you alone." "Thank you." She paused, then looked back at me. "Good night, part-timer." "Good night." She walked away, and I watched her disappear towards the stairs. I didn't see her again for a while. I tried to forget the conversation. I really did. I went back to work. Around 2 in the morning, I was checking the breakfast area when I heard it, a dripping sound. I stopped and looked around. It sounded like water. I followed the noise towards the counter. The breakfast area was dark, except for the weak light above the tables. The black window at the far end reflected the room back at me, making it feel deeper than it actually was. Then there was another drip. I looked at the ketchup dispenser. A dark red liquid had gathered around the nozzle. For half a second, my stomach dropped. It looked like blood. A thick, dark red trail had run down the side and pooled on the counter. I stood there staring at it, then reached out and touched it. Ketchup. Of course it was ketchup. I actually laughed. Jesus Christ. I grabbed some kitchen roll and wiped it up. The dispenser had probably been leaking for days. I cleaned the counter and threw the paper away. Nothing strange, just a shitty ketchup dispenser. I went back into the kitchen. There were cups in the sink, so I washed them. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I scrubbed each one and stacked them beside the sink. The kitchen was unbearably hot. When I finished, I looked towards the fire escape. The door was still propped open slightly from the previous night. I decided to open it properly for a few minutes. Maybe some fresh air would help. I dried my hands, walked over, put my hand on the handle, and pulled. The door didn't move. I frowned and pulled again. Nothing. Then, I froze. Something had just slammed into the other side of the door. I stared at it. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, bang! Harder this time. I stepped backwards, and something on the other side began pounding on the door. I didn't wait to find out what was on the other side. I turned and left the kitchen as quickly as I could without actually running. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I glanced back and saw the fire door still shaking slightly in its frame. I checked the time, 2:30. I still had hours left, so I decided to take the bins out, something I hated doing, but it was better than standing at reception and wondering what had hit the fire door. I collected the rubbish bags and carried them outside. The heat wave was finally over. The air had changed completely, heavy, charged, wrong in a different way. A thunderstorm had rolled in without warning, and the sky above the car park was bruised black, lit every few seconds by distant lightning that made the hotel look like it was flickering in and out of reality. Thunder rumbled low and constant, like something moving through the clouds. The car park was almost empty, lit by a handful of yellow security lights that now seemed weak against the storm. Rain hadn't fully started yet, but you could feel it coming, wind pushing through the space in uneven bursts, rattling the bin shed door slightly as I walked past it. The hotel behind me looked enormous in the darkness, its windows scattered with the faint glow of sleeping guests. As I walked towards the bin shed, I heard something scraping inside. I stopped, but it continued. It must be rats. I stared at the shed, unable to see anything through the gaps in the doors. The wind picked up, and the metal siding creaked softly, like the whole structure was breathing. For a moment, I considered going back inside. Then I reminded myself I was standing in a car park at 2:30 in the morning because I was afraid of a noise in a bin shed. So I opened the door, and the scraping stopped. The sudden silence felt louder than the storm. I put the rubbish in the bins, stood there listening to nothing but the distant thunder rolling over the hotel, then shut the door and started walking back. Halfway across the car park, the rain finally began. At first, it was just a few heavy drops, fat and scattered, hitting the concrete like thrown stones. Then it came all at once. The security lights turned the rain into bright falling wires. That's when I saw someone. At first, I thought it was a trick of the weather, the way the light fractured through the rain. But a figure stood near the edge of the car park under one of the weaker security lights. The red coat gave her away, the old woman. She was dancing. There was no music, only thunder and rain and the constant hiss of water hitting concrete. Her movements were slower now, heavier, as if the storm was pulling at her. She swayed side to side, arms hanging loose before lifting in those same delicate, unnatural gestures. Rain ran off her coat in dark streams. She tilted her head back, staring into the storm, and for a moment lightning lit her face, blank, calm, almost pleased. Then she began spinning. Her red coat clung to her as the wind pushed against her, twisting the fabric around her legs. I stood there watching, rain soaking through my clothes in seconds, unable to understand what I was seeing. Then she stopped. Instantly, like something had cut her off mid-movement, her head turned towards me. I froze. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second I saw her clearly. She was smiling. I don't know how long she had known I was there. She simply stared across the storm-lashed car park, rain running down her face, then raised one hand and waved. Thunder cracked immediately after, so loud it felt like it hit the ground. I turned and walked back towards the hotel. I didn't run, I didn't look back. I just walked through the rain, through the wind, through the feeling that something was standing behind me. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The sudden quiet of the lobby felt wrong after the storm. Everything sounded too contained, too close. I went straight to reception and sat down, my hands shaking, water dripping onto the floor from my sleeves, staring at the computer screen for several seconds before the phone rang. I picked it up. "Good evening, this is reception. How can I help?" "Nothing." Then I heard breathing. I pulled the phone away for a second, then put it back. "Hello?" The breathing continued, followed by a whisper. "Are you still there?" I knew the voice. It was the old woman. I didn't answer. She breathed again, long and slow. I swallowed, and she laughed quietly. Are you still there? I looked at the CCTV monitors showing the lobby, corridors, car park, and entrance. Rain blurred the outside cameras, turning the car park feed into a shifting smear of light and shadow. I switched through them. I checked the car park feed, nothing but rain and empty space under the security lights. The bin shed was just a dark shape in the storm. Then the screen flickered. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something standing beside it. I changed cameras. Are you still watching? I didn't answer. She laughed softly. Do you get scared when you go outside part-timer? I looked at the glass doors. Rain hammered against them, distorting everything beyond. She breathed into the phone. You never know what could be waiting for you. I looked back at the CCTV. The bin shed camera showed nothing but concrete, rain, and light. Then I heard it. The same dripping sound from earlier. I turned towards the breakfast area. The phone was still against my ear, but the old woman was silent. I put the phone down and walked into the breakfast area, already knowing what it was. The ketchup dispenser again. I switched on the light. It flickered. A thick red drop formed beneath the nozzle and fell. Fuck's sake, I muttered, grabbing kitchen roll and wiping it down, cleaning the counter, checking the dispenser, making sure it was closed. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Then I looked towards the window for no real reason. The glass was black, my reflection faint in it, until I saw her. She was standing beside the bin shed, the old woman in the red coat, completely still, facing the hotel, facing me. Rain poured around her in sheets. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I knew she was looking straight at the window. Lightning flashed, and I stepped back. I stared through the glass, but there was nothing. Just the empty, rain-soaked car park. I didn't go outside again. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening, at least nothing I remember. The storm never really stopped, it just moved further away, rumbling in the distance like it was circling the hotel instead of leaving. At 7, I clocked out, walked home through wet streets, still steaming from the night's heat and rain combined, and slept for maybe an hour. The next thing I remember, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee. There's something I should probably mention before I continue. I have to see a therapist. It's hotel policy. They call it a mandatory occupational well-being assessment, but everyone just calls it the therapist. I was sent there after a different incident I don't really want to talk about yet. The therapist thinks I become fixated on things, that I sometimes confuse what I think happened with what actually happened. Maybe due to sleep deprivation. I don't agree with her. Mostly. I saw what I saw, heard what I heard. I'm back in tonight. Another 10:30 until 7. Another night alone in the hotel. I just hope there's no scratching from the bin shed tonight, but if there is, I pray to God it's rats.